Hey everyone, it's me, EODGamer here, and we're gonna go in depth in terms of a tier list review for 1.0. This is as of pre-release, so a lot of it has changed in terms of coming into the official launch, as challenges also changed in terms of simulated universe and memory of chaos challenges, while also their kits, some of them being tweaked quite a bit coming into official launch as well. We won't be touching on future units, so if any of you are interested, I'll link up in the video card a tier list specifically for these characters that are limited as well. Okay, now let's get into the tier list review real quick. I think we're gonna just go from left to right, just like that, all the way to the bottom, so we can quickly see. So if we clear all the S tier ones out of the way, it's much more entertaining as well. So Zila, I think that Zila still stands, very strong unit. Doesn't really fall off, especially a lot of people were saying that with multiple monsters, she's not as strong. A lot of us see that she's still very solid as well. Does a lot of damage and is scaling better into the late game also, especially as a lot of us get our gold tier artifacts once we hit Trailblaze level 40 and above, and a lot of us are gradually reaching there as well. I'll still remain her in S tier, really solid character. Clara is one of the characters that a lot of people didn't agree with me going to the official launch. I've started her off as S tier in terms of pre-release. She was a really strong unit in terms of very good amounts of counter ability, able to solo a lot of sets in terms of once she went into official launch. You can see some memes of her being the only one alive just soloing entire world floors in terms of the simulated universe. Very strong character, I think very underrated as well. I'll still definitely leave her as S tier. I'll shift this a bit just in case we need to make more space for later. Next up, we have Esta. I think Esta also remains S tier. Very solid character, good amounts of speed buff. Some tweaks to her overall kit in terms of CBT3 didn't really affect her. She has a bit of burn in her kit also, so she's actually one of the characters with a very versatile, can fit into a lot of team compositions in terms of speed teams, in terms of attack buffing teams, in terms of unit fire break, unit damage over time. Has it all. I think a very solid character as well. Herta, okay, I think this is my first mistake and I apologize for that. I think that one of the major issues with Herta is definitely the scaling that we had previously, where attack was a very large stat. It got nerfed in CBT3 in terms of all characters have much lower attack, and also her multipliers were equally nerfed. So that is one of the major factors. In terms of a spin, it still does a decent amount of damage, but I don't think it's as broken as where it was in the past. Definitely other characters, for example Pella, does offer a much better and more generic ice set, and for that reason I think I'll actually bring Herta down to either A or B tier, but I'll probably leave her in A tier. I do think that she still has quite a lot of relevance, especially in like the simulated universe, because there's a lot of like elation buffs you can get that has a lot of follow-up attacks as well. Alright, next up we have Natasha. I think Natasha still remains in S tier, very solid. We only have one healer if you're free to play and don't get lucky with Bailu. Of course later on there's Lota, but for now a lot of us are likely building Natasha, and I definitely agree that I think that she still remains in S tier. Very solid character, must build in my opinion. Okay, next up, Tingyun. I think no one has disagreeing with this one. Tingyun is also really strong, super solid in terms of her kit, energy restoration, buffing, and coming to official launch is the same thing. Pella. Now, Pella was another one that a lot of people didn't believe at first. I think if you play Pella and you actually build her a little bit in terms of damage and have maybe a little bit more Eidolons, she's an extremely solid character to have. I think super underrated out of all of the S tiers. Not really talked about a lot, but defense break is universal. Doesn't matter whether your DPS skills with HP, attack, defense, you can always use defense break because it's applied on the enemy and you will always be doing more damage as well. Very solid, S tier definitely, no doubt. Fire MC. I think Fire MC is also really strong coming to official launch. The shields are still not as strong as you would like, for example like a character like Gepard, but it's a free unit, does a very good amounts of like sub DPS damage in terms of fire break damage from the side as well. So I think really solid, and I'm amazed that Hoyoverse actually is giving us such a free unit going to official launch as well. Very unbecoming of them compared to like other games like maybe Genshin Impact. So those are my thoughts. I think these are the S tier reviews so far. And next up we have Dunheng. Now Dunheng is a very solid one. I recommended him because he's a good DPS but also having the ability to slow enemy targets as well. Really vital, especially if you see like other Han characters, for example Susang. She actually has a little bit of nerfs going to official launch. Dunheng is extremely strong, especially if you have seen like some of my free-to-play clears using the free-to-play base units. He can really dish up like 8k, 9k crit damage very early on between like Trailblaze level 30 to 40. Insanely strong. I do think that he's still in S tier, and even if he falls off in terms of his DPS potential, when you go into the late game, he actually becomes very, very strong as a boss controller, speed down type unit as well. And those are my opinions in terms of the previous S tier categories. And now let's go into the A+ tier and see who actually might have made it a bit higher. Okay, and first up, well, I think out of all of the standard 5 stars in the game right now, the strongest by far will definitely have to be Welt. I'm bringing him up to S tier. It's just simply very strong. I talked about in like the Welt video in terms of team composition, the Esta speed up and Welt speed down video already of that team composition is extremely broken. Like you are able to take almost a super amount of turns because of this combo of Welt into Esta. So the speed differential between like the opponent teams and your teams is just tremendous. I really think he's the best character in the game now, to suited for a lot of fights, especially in like simulated universe. It makes it just look so easy as well. I do think that he's probably the best. I'll bring him up to S tier. Next up, I'm going to talk about Bronya. I'm actually going to leave Bronya in A+ tier, and for the reason is a lot of us in the early game, I would say now we are still in the early game because we are barely even like Trailblaze level 60, which I actually consider then as true end game sort of thing. So in like the early to mid game right now, Bronya is a kid that generally scales well into the much later game where characters can utilize her crit damage buffing ability. So I would say that it's not as strong compared to like characters like Esta and Tingyun, who really pop off right away at the start of the game and don't really require that wind up time as well. And I'm sure a lot of you have realized like hyper carries now only we have like a character like Zealer as a pure hyper carry. The rest of the pure hyper carries maybe are like 4 stars in a sense. So we don't really get to see a lot of Bronya's true value yet. She will definitely get better later on once we have more hyper carry kind of characters that are relatively slower. Now Bailu is a really strong character right now because she's the only other healer other than Natasha in the game. A lot of people say that in order to progress the Memory of Chaos, you actually need Bailu in order to progress. I actually disagree with that. I'm already into the Memory of Chaos, and I already have a strategy of going in even with like 4-star units only. So I don't think that a healer is very necessary. Check back on the channel, I'll be teaching you how to clear it as well in terms of Memory of Chaos without a second healer in your team. Overall, I do think that it's nice to have a second healer. It definitely makes it a lot more easier, but if you just do a little bit of tweaking, I don't think it's super necessary at this stage right now. Okay, next up, Susang. I think Susang is a character that is very well balanced. She does a lot in terms of like she can benefit from damage over time teams. She benefits from weakness breaking gear. If you pump her up in energy restoration, she goes very quickly as well because her chicken does a lot of damage and actions, advances her forward also. Super versatile character. Saw a bit of like nerfs going to official launch from the previous closed betas, but very independent. I want to put her in S, but I do think that in terms of the other characters in S, Susang doesn't make it there yet. Still a very solid character nonetheless. I will leave her in A+ tier. Still extremely solid in my opinion. Very well rounded. Next up, we have Ting Chue. Now, I've already done build guide videos on a lot of these 4-star characters, Ting Chue included. I think Ting Chue is an extremely strong character, considering a lot of us might not have pulled Zealer, or maybe we are waiting for future characters or Tingyuan as well. Ting Chue actually makes up for a lot of quantum breaking damage in her kit. You can build her very quickly, simply with like a 3-star light cone with some break effect to get that quantum break if you're looking for it. Otherwise, if you build her up properly, she actually does a very good amounts of damage as well. I think Ting Chue is extremely strong, definitely not to be slept on if you don't have another quantum damage dealer like Zealer, and even if you do in future, you can always pair them together for a mono quantum team with Silver Wolf later on. Super solid. I'll leave her at A+, very strong damage as well. And in terms of Gepard, I think Gepard I left him in A tier because I was thinking of a very long horizon where we are all like Trailblaze level 60. But in terms of 1.0, when we are all still very early on into the game right now, barely even Trailblaze level 50, he definitely does a lot of value, and I'm going to bump him up into A+ tier. He doesn't do too much outside of shielding your whole team, but as you've seen, like running him in your team composition means you can run like 3 offensive units and he takes care of all your defensive position. Pretty strong character to have overall. I think he's really solid, but I don't think he's a necessity in terms of team composition. Natasha does more than enough to do a lot of sustain as well. Especially in the simulated universe, you can find that Natasha, together with like preservation or destruction buffs, does make up for a lot of that shielding and sustain already. But still, nonetheless, Gepard is a pretty strong character. Alright, now Yanqing. Now Yanqing, I placed him in A because he falls off a little bit in the late game, as he doesn't really scale very well with crit rate. As you know, he caps off with crit rate very early, and there are a lot of like light cones that provides quite a lot of crit rate already. But being in the early game as we are, we definitely do see quite a tremendous amount of value in the character's kit focused solely on being an early game character. I definitely will push him up to A+ tier, very solid in the early game, but one thing to know is he of course does fall off quite tremendously once Zealer starts to pop off with a lot of like crit damage stuff. But still, a very strong ice single target damage dealer, best in slot in terms of single target ice breaking as well. Very good character if you have him too. Okay, Jingyuan, as of time of recording, we're still on Zealer's banner, but I do think while he was rated A in terms of, because there are many other options like Kafka for AoE damage, lightning, there's already like Serval who's really strong and it's a free character to do, I would actually push him up to A+ tier, for the sake of being in the early game right now. There are not many competition for him still in the match. Once Kafka comes in and her multipliers are actually fully known, we can of course adjust the tier list accordingly then. But for now, I think Jingyuan is still in a good situation, very strong amounts of damage, very good synergy with characters like Tingyun and stuff like that. I will talk about like banner comparisons of both Zealer and Jingyuan in another video I'll be working on after this, so you guys can take a look if you're interested as well. But for now, let's talk in terms of Serval. So Serval, I think one of the biggest issues with Serval's playstyle or her situation right now in the meta is Jingyuan is coming out next, and they both fulfill exactly the same role as like an AoE DPS character. You generally don't want to run them together also, because you can always play like in a mono lightning team. You can run Tingyuan as the buffer, into Jingyuan as the AoE damage dealer, into, for example, Bailu as like the lightning damage dealer, and of course, last but not least, you'll want like a single target lightning damage dealer also, which will probably fill up your like last slot if you wanted to. So those are my thoughts. I think she's in a conflicting position right now. I will actually leave her at A tier. I don't think that she's still a strong character, but I don't think she competes very well against Jingyuan, especially with his very strong damage that he provides as well. Okay, and now let's talk about Hook. Now, Hook is a character that I put in A because of her reliance on Esta. Other than teams with like a dedicated buffer in terms of turn movement like Bronya and as well as Esta, she does take quite a bit of time to wind up, even though she does a lot of damage, not very strong in my opinion because of the lack of speed in her overall kit. Other than that, she does have a good amount of self-sustain, plays into damage over time teams also, and unlike other destruction class which like sap HP, she actually has like self-restoration when she attacks like a burn target. So I think that's really useful for her kit. I'm still going to put her in A. I just think there are much better options in terms of single target damage that provides as well, and doesn't have that restrictive requirement of needing someone to like dedicatedly action advance this character. Okay, Sampo. Now, I don't have this character on my main account yet, but I've already tested it out on my sub account. I think Sampo is a character that will scale better on in the later game as we get more damage over time characters. Kafka is one of them that comes to mind. It's very strong damage over time character that saw quite a lot of tweaks in a kit rather going to official launch. So I think it's interesting to pair like Kafka with Sampo going to official launch. For now, I'm leaving him as A tier. I don't think damage over time has its time right now to shine, but definitely it will do someday. March 7. I think March 7 was rated A because of the plenty of options otherwise. And I do still think that she remains in A right now. Her kit is just like centered around a few gimmicks in terms of combinations. For example, like March 7 into Trailblazer, March 7 to Clara, and stuff like that. Not many versatilities in terms of overall kit, and a lot of the problems that we face now in terms of like the memory as well as simulated universe does come a bit from like AoE damage, where we are not accidentally not protecting like a squishy and stuff like that. March 7 doesn't really solve those issues. For that, I'm still gonna leave her like in A tier. We have Himiko. Himiko I rated B at first because of her potential to be power crept very early on, but these are still early days, so I do think that I'm actually going to push Himiko up to A tier. She does very strong amounts of damage, but one of the major issues like with fire characters, and same applies to Hook as well, is that Esta and Fire MC by and large already address a lot of fire break damage issues. For now, mono teams like pure fire doesn't really apply yet. but in future I definitely do think pure fire will apply. She got quite a lot of buffs coming to official launch, but in terms of a general like big picture point of view, her issues still remain. Potential with power creep, mono pyro not coming to battle yet, and competition between Esta and Trailblazer for fire teams. Of course, once we reach like 1.1, 1.2 and stuff like that, I think that she will likely get a bump up as mono teams do make into the game a little bit more, especially once Silver Wolf comes into the meta a bit. For now, I'll leave her in A tier, an upgrade from B. Ireland. A lot of people are liking this character coming to official launch. He's a character that does like a lot of damage, functions at low life, but one of the reasons why I left him at B, and I likely still will be leaving him at B, is because of his inability to be very flexible. If you have been playing him, you likely need a lot of like catering of buffs specifically for him, or you need a character, for example, like Gepard with a very thick shield to sustain him. He doesn't even work very well with healers, for example, like Natasha, because he likes to be played at lower life as well. And it's quite difficult to sustain him at lower life, especially in harder content when you are trying to fight opponents under level. DPS is not really the issue in terms of harder content in the simulated universe, but it's more of trying to survive, and his low HP and nature to be super low HP does make it a little bit more challenging in that aspect. So I will generally be rating him as B. I do see the case of bringing him higher, especially if you have characters like Gepard, but for now, I will probably leave him in B. And last but not least, Trailblazer. I think Trailblazer is like the plain vanilla of all characters. Very simple kit to understand, good amounts of AoE, good amounts of single target. I left it at B because there are just so many other better characters that outclass this character in many ways. Susang is one of them, very strong single target damage. AoE, if you wanted to, you could find physical AoE in Clara as well. So a lot of competition, but I do think the Trailblazer is by no means as weak as some of the main characters, the base main characters in other Hoyoverse games as well. And do check on these two other videos which I think you might be interested in as well. Thank you so much for watching, and see you in the next video.